I stopped counting the bodies after the first 100 days. Not because I grew numb to death, you never truly do. Not down here, but because the numbers stopped meaning anything. In the Underhive, death is atmospheric. It hangs in the recycled air like the perpetual chemical fog that seeps from the corroded pipes overhead, a constant presence you learn to breathe around. My name is Vex Tertian, and I have lived 37 years in the lower reaches of Hive Primus, 17 levels below the last functional transit station, in a section the upper spire cartographers optimistically label as Habitation Zone Gamma 97, but which we simply call the Drench. I am writing this account on salvaged data slate fragments, their screens flickering in the dim biolume light, because someone should document what it means to exist in the place the Imperium has forgotten. Not abandoned, mind you. Forgotten. There is a difference. The Drench earned its name from the constant moisture that weeps from every surface, a thick condensation born from the heat exhaust of the manufactorums 3 levels above us, mixing with the frozen air that somehow infiltrates from the hive's outer shell. Everything is perpetually damp. Your clothes never dry. Your skin develops a grayish pallor from the moisture and the lack of sunlight, sunlight being a concept I have only read about in the few intact propaganda leaflets that occasionally drift down from the mid-hive, their edges curling with mold. The water that collects in the gutters and pools in the craters of the rockcrete floor is not clean. It carries with it a film of chemical runoff, machine oil, and substances I have learned not to examine too closely. When you are thirsty enough, you drink it anyway. When you are desperate enough, you stop boiling it first. I was not born in the Drench. That detail matters because it means I remember something else, something marginally better. My family came down from level -94 when I was 20, following the collapse of the packaging district where my father operated a small sealing press. The collapse was not metaphorical. The entire northern quarter of the level gave way, the weight of the hive above finally exceeding the tolerance of foundations laid 10,000 years ago. We descended through the breach in the floor with 200 other refugees, climbing down makeshift rope ladders and rusted maintenance chains, and we kept descending, because every level we passed through was already claimed, already occupied by people who looked at us with the hollow-eyed wariness of those who have nothing left to share. We finally stopped at the Drench, because there was nowhere lower to go. Below us lies only the sump, the absolute bottom of the hive, where the waste of billions collects in toxic lakes and things move in the darkness that were never human to begin with. The architecture of the Drench is a palimpsest of forgotten construction. I have learned to read the layers because my survival has often depended on knowing which walls can bear weight and which are simply rust, held together by prayer. The oldest structures are plastered with the imperial aquila, the double-headed eagle so corroded that it looks like a wound in the metal. These foundations date to the hive's original construction, massive ferrocrete pillars stamped with manufacturing codes from forges whose names no longer exist. Built atop these are the industrial remnants of some long-dead era machine housings, the size of tenement blocks, their purposes obscure, their interiors gutted for scrap metal decades before my birth. Within these shells, subsequent generations constructed their own dwellings using whatever materials could be scavenged: sheet metal, corrugated plastic, sections of pipe hammered flat, woven wire, tanned hide from the corpse rats that infest the deeper warrens. My own habitation is a wedge-shaped space carved into the angle where a massive coolant pipe meets the outer wall of what might have once been a generatorium chamber. The pipe is warm, blissfully warm, and I guard my claim to this spot with a violence that would have horrified my younger self. The warm pipe is the first mystery that structured my life down here. When I first claimed this space, killing the previous occupant in a brief, ugly struggle that I will not detail, I assumed the pipe was simply carrying waste heat from the manufactorums above, but the warmth fluctuates in patterns. The pipe grows cold enough that frost forms on its surface, and I must wrap myself in every scrap of fabric I own to avoid hypothermia. Then, precisely 19 hours later, the heat returns, but not gradually. It arrives as a surge, hot enough that I once burned my palm badly by touching the metal unprepared. This cycle never varies. 47 hours of warmth, 19 hours of cold. I began marking the cycles on the wall with a piece of sharpened slag, tiny scratches in the rust. I have made 4,016 marks. I do not know what the pattern means, but I know that my life has become structured around it, and that others in the drench have noticed the reliability of my pipe's warmth and my habitation, with the careful assessment of predators watching wounded prey. Food in the drench comes from 5 sources, and you learn to exploit all of them if you wish to survive. First are the corpse starch rations that occasionally filter down from the mid-hive, stamped with the administratum's seal and already 3 years past their expiration date when they reach us. These arrive irregularly, distributed by a man we call the tithe keeper, who operates from a reinforced bunker near the primary support pillar. The tithe keeper is the closest thing to authority we have, a representative of some distant sub-department of the planetary government who descends once every few months with armed guards and crates of rations. The distribution is supposedly governed by work credits. You labor in the salvage gangs or the reclamation crews. You earn chits, you exchange chits for food. In practice, the tithe keeper distributes rations based on criteria he never explains, and challenging his decisions results in your name being struck from the rolls permanently. I have not received an official ration in 7 months. I do not know what I did to merit this exclusion, but I suspect it relates to an incident where I refused to enter a collapsed section to retrieve a particular piece of machinery. The tithe keeper's guards shot the man next to me when he also refused. I was luckier, or perhaps less lucky. I am still here. The second source is the fungal growths that proliferate in the damp darkness. There are dozens of varieties, ranging from the relatively safe grey shelf fungus that grows on the coolant pipes to the vivid purple blooms that sprout from corpses and will kill you in hours if ingested. I learned fungus identification from a woman named Kelda, who had survived in the drench for 40 years and knew which varieties would merely make you sick versus which would cause your organs to liquefy. Kelda taught me in exchange for protection, as she had grown too old to defend her knowledge from the younger scavengers. I protected her for 3 years until she died in her sleep one night, her body simply giving out. I burned her corpse on a pyre of scrapwood as she had requested, and I still harvest the shelf fungus from the pipe she showed me, boiling it into a grey paste that tastes like metal and earth, but provides enough nutrition to continue existing. The third source is vermin. The drench supports an entire ecosystem of creatures, adapted to the darkness and toxicity. Corpse rats are the most common, pale-furred rodents the size of small dogs with teeth that can gnaw through soft metals. They are edible if you cook them thoroughly and avoid the organs, which accumulate heavy metals. I trap them using spring snares made from salvaged wire, positioning the traps near the waste channels where the rats come to drink the contaminated water. I have eaten so much rat meat that I sometimes dream I am becoming one, my teeth elongating, my eyes adjusting to see in the absolute darkness of the deep warrens. There are also the things we call scrapers blind, many-legged creatures that move along the walls and ceiling, leaving trails of acidic mucus. They are not edible, but their shells can be used as cutting implements, and their mucus, properly diluted, can serve as a primitive antiseptic. I learned this from necessity after a wound on my leg became infected, the flesh turning black, and I had no medicine. I captured a scraper, milked its mucus glands with trembling hands, and applied the substance to my wound. The pain was extraordinary, but the infection receded. My leg still bears the scars, puckered tissue that never properly healed. The fourth source is theft. I am not proud of this, but morality is a luxury manufactured in the upper hive and ill-suited to survival in the drench. When the tithe keeper's distribution occurs, I sometimes position myself near the bunker and watch for individuals who receive rations but appear weak or isolated. I follow them back to their habitations, wait until they sleep, and take what I need. I have never killed for food. I maintain this boundary, this last thread of the person I was, but I have beaten unconscious, threatened, and intimidated. The other scavengers do the same to me when they perceive weakness. My habitation has been broken into twice. The first time, I was absent, and they took everything not bolted down. The second time, I was present, and the intruder left with 3 broken fingers and a concussion. I gave him those injuries with a pipe wrench I keep within reach at all times. The wrench is my most valuable possession after the warm pipe itself. I sleep with it clutched in my hand. The 5th source appeared 3 years ago, and it is the source I am most frightened of, though I have come to depend on it. In one of the deeper warrens, accessible only through a partially flooded tunnel, there is a chamber we call the garden. Some group, has established a genuine hydroponic operation using equipment salvaged from Emperor knows where. The garden produces real vegetables, pale, elongated things that taste like nothing but are nevertheless grown from seeds, living plants sustained by artificial lights. The garden is operated by a man called Verdant. No one knows his real name. Verdant is short, thin, with skin so pale he seems to glow in the darkness, and he never speaks. He communicates through written notes on scraps of paper, and he trades vegetables for specific items. Functioning light bulbs, intact wiring, chemicals whose purposes I do not understand, and occasionally, information. I have traded with Verdant 17 times. Each time, he asks for something unusual. Once, he requested a count of the functional Vox speakers in a specific section of the Underhive. Once, he wanted a sample of the purple corpse fungus, delivered live and intact. Once, and this is the request that still disturbs me, he asked me to record the exact time and duration of the warmth fluctuations in my pipe. I gave him 6 months of data, all my careful marks translated to a written log. He read it slowly, his lips moving, and then he gave me 3 vegetables and a new note. The pattern is accelerating. Mark the changes. I have been marking them ever since, and he is correct. The warm periods are growing shorter. 47 hours became 46, then 45. I am now at 42. The cold periods lengthen correspondingly. I do not know what this means, but Verdant pays me well for the data, and I am terrified to learn why he wants it. Water is paradoxical in the drench. We are surrounded by moisture, drowning in it, and yet clean water is desperately scarce. The condensation that weeps from every surface is contaminated. The pools that collect in the floor craters are toxic. There is a central water reclamation system, ancient pipes that still function after a fashion, and from these pipes you can sometimes fill containers with water that will not immediately poison you. The pipes are controlled by the Water Guild, a loose confederation of the strongest gangs, and access is rationed brutally. You fight for position at the pipes during the flow times, which occur unpredictably, and you fill whatever containers you possess as quickly as possible before the flow stops or someone takes your position by force. I have a collection of containers, plastic bottles with corporate logos worn to illegibility, metal canisters stamped with military codes, glass jars that once held something called preserved fruit, according to their faded labels. I protect these containers as fiercely as I protect my habitation. Without them, I cannot store water. Without stored water, I cannot survive the intervals between flow times, which sometimes stretch to 4 or 5 days. The people of the drench are not a community. We are a collection of survivors who happen to occupy the same space, bound together only by shared geography and mutual predation. There is no law here except the law of force. There is no justice except what you can enforce yourself. There are no authorities except the tithe keeper, who is more distant tyrant than governor, and verdant, whose purposes remain opaque. There are gangs. Certainly, the largest is the Rust Kings, who control the primary access routes to the mid-hive and extract tolls from anyone attempting to ascend. I avoid the Rust Kings because I cannot pay their tolls and I am not strong enough to fight them. There are smaller groups, the Scrapers, who specialize in salvaging metal from the deepest, most dangerous warrens, the Wireheads, augmented with crude cybernetics, and perpetually seeking more technology to graft to their bodies. The Penitents, religious fanatics who believe the suffering of the Underhive is sacred preparation for the Emperor's judgment. I am affiliated with none of these groups. I am what we call a solo, someone who survives alone, and this means I am both pitied and envied. Pitied because I have no one to watch my back, envied because I owe allegiance to no one and can move through territories more freely than gang members can. Yet I am not entirely alone. There is Skiv, a child of perhaps 12 years who attached himself to me 2 years ago and whom I have been unable to dislodge. Skiv's origins are unknown. He appeared one day, trailing behind me as I returned from a salvage run, and when I turned to chase him off, he simply stared at me with huge, dark eyes and said, "You have warm place. I help you keep warm place." I do not know what compelled me to allow this arrangement. Perhaps it was the pragmatism, an extra pair of eyes, someone to watch the habitation while I scavenge. Perhaps it was something I hesitate to name, some remnant of the person I was before the drench. Skiv is useful. He is small enough to squeeze through gaps in the rubble that I cannot navigate, quick enough to steal from the corpse rat traps before the owners notice. He brings me things, scraps of wire, functioning batteries, once even a intact data slate that I traded to Verdant for a week's worth of vegetables. In exchange, I allow him to sleep in my habitation during the cold periods, wrapped in a salvaged thermal blanket, and I teach him what I know about survival. Teaching Skiv has forced me to articulate the rules I have internalized, and speaking them aloud makes them sound insane. Never drink standing water without boiling it first, unless you are already dying of thirst, in which case it does not matter. Never enter a chamber where the air smells sweet. Sweet air means gas leaks or corpse bloom spores. Never trust light sources you do not recognize. Some gangs mark their territories with phosphorescent fungi that produce hallucinogenic spores. Never follow sounds of crying or calls for help. They are usually traps. Never eat meat unless you know what creature it came from. Never sleep in the same location 2 nights in a row if you can avoid it. Never reveal that you have food or water to strangers. Never make eye contact with the wireheads. They interpret it as challenge. Never go into the sump levels, no matter what you hear moving down there. Skiv absorbs these lessons with a solemnity that breaks my heart. He should be learning to read and write, to calculate, to recite imperial catechisms. Instead, he learns how to kill rats and identify edible fungus. The sounds of the drench form a constant symphony that I have learned to interpret as precisely as a musical savant reads notation. There is the low, grinding rumble of the manufactorums above, a vibration that travels through the structure and never ceases. There are the random clangs and crashes from the mid-hive, objects falling through the infrastructure, the acoustic signature of distant collapses. There are the skittering sounds of vermin, the wet slither of scrapers, the occasional screams that echo through the warren, screams that might be human or might be something else, and which everyone learns to ignore because investigating them is invariably fatal. There is the drip of water, omnipresent, maddening in its irregularity. There is the hiss of leaking pipes, the crackle of electrical shorts, the groaning of metal under stress, and there are the voices. Even in the drench, people talk. They mutter to themselves in the darkness. They call out to companions. They pray to the Emperor, their voices rising and falling in the rhythms of litanies learned by rote. I have learned to distinguish between the different kinds of sounds: normal activity, which has a certain purposeful quality; distress, which carries a panicked edge; and madness, which manifests as rambling monologues or singing in languages that might not exist. 6 months ago, a new sound entered the symphony, and it is this sound that has become my second great mystery, intertwined with the fluctuations of my warm pipe in ways I do not yet understand. It began as a low thrumming, so deep it was felt more than heard, a vibration that set my teeth on edge. The thrumming occurs in cycles, coinciding exactly with the cold periods of my pipe. When the pipe grows cold, the thrumming begins. When the warmth returns, the thrumming stops. At first, I believed this was simply mechanical sympathy, some large machine powering down and affecting both the heating system and creating the vibration. But the thrumming has characteristics that make me question this explanation. It varies in intensity, growing louder some cycles and softer others. It sometimes carries within it other sounds, higher-pitched tones that pulse in patterns that remind me uncomfortably of communication. Morse code, perhaps, or something similar. I have tried to record these patterns, scratching their rhythms onto my data slate, but the patterns are too complex and my documentation too crude. What troubles me most is that I have begun to feel that the thrumming is aware. This is insane, I know this. Machines are not aware. And yet, when I stand with my hand pressed against the pipe during the cold periods, feeling the thrumming through the metal, I sense something like intelligence in the patterns. Intention. Purpose. I mentioned this to Verdant during one of our trades. I do not know what compelled me to speak of it. I usually keep our transactions purely business, but the thrumming had been particularly intense the previous night, and I was exhausted and frightened. I scrawled a note on a scrap of paper. The pipe makes sounds when cold. Patterns. Like language. Do you know what this is? Verdant read the note slowly, his expression unchanging. Then he wrote his response. You hear it too. Good. It means you are attuning. Continue documentation. Do not discuss with others. I stared at this response for a long time. Attuning to what? I wrote back. Verdant simply shook his head and handed me my vegetables. The trade was over. I left the garden with more questions than I arrived with, and a growing certainty that my warm pipe is not simply a heating conduit but something else entirely, something connected to whatever Verdant is monitoring in the deep Underhive. The social dynamics of the drench are governed by 3 currencies: violence, information, and desperation. Violence is the simplest and most direct. If you are strong enough, fast enough, brutal enough, you can take what you need and defend what you have. I am moderately capable in violence. I have survived this long, but I am not exceptional. There are many in the drench who could kill me if they chose. My survival depends on not giving them reason to choose. Information is more subtle, knowing which sections are stable, which are about to collapse, where the Water Guild will hold the next distribution, which gangs are feuding, where the Tithe Keeper's guards patrol. This knowledge has value. Those who possess it can trade it for food, water, protection. I accumulate information obsessively, listening to gossip, observing patterns, mapping the territories in my mind. Desperation is the currency everyone possesses in abundance. When you are desperate enough, you will do anything. You will betray allies. You will eat things that will sicken you. You will take risks that are almost certainly fatal, because the certainty of death from inaction exceeds the probability of death from action. I have watched desperation drive people to walk into the sump, knowing they will not return, because starvation had become unbearable. I have watched desperation drive people to attack the Tithe Keeper's guards, knowing they will be shot, because the rage and hopelessness demanded expression. I have felt desperation myself, a cold weight in my gut, and I have done things because of it that I cannot allow myself to remember in detail, or I will not be able to continue. Skiv asked me once why we do not simply leave. Up, he said, pointing at the ceiling of our habitation toward the mid-hive layers above. Climb up. Get out. I tried to explain to him that it is not so simple. The Rust Kings control the primary routes upward, and their toll for passage is impossibly high. They demand years of indentured labor in exchange for transit, which is simply trading one form of imprisonment for another. There are uncontrolled routes, certainly, shafts, and maintenance tunnels that theoretically connect the levels. But these are collapsed, sealed, or infested with things that make the corpse rats look benign. I have explored 3 such routes in my time in the Drench. The first ended at a wall of fused metal, some ancient industrial accident that had melted the passage shut. The second descended rather than ascended, leading down toward the sump, and I retreated when the air grew so toxic that my eyes began to stream and my lungs burned. The third seemed promising, a steep vertical shaft with rusted ladder rungs, and I climbed for what felt like hours, my muscles screaming, until I emerged into a chamber that had once been a transit station, but was now occupied by the wire heads. They were performing some kind of ritual, their bodies partially disassembled, wires and cables snaking between them in patterns that made my eyes hurt to follow. When they noticed me, they did not speak. They simply turned, in unison, and began walking toward me with an eerie synchronized gait. I fled back down the shaft, descending so quickly I tore the skin from my palms on the ladder rungs, and I have never attempted that route again. But there is another reason we do not leave, a reason I did not explain to Skiv, because I am not certain he would understand, or perhaps because I am not certain I understand it myself. The Drench has a gravity to it, not physical, but psychological. After a certain period of time, the idea of living anywhere else becomes abstract, theoretical, a fantasy disconnected from reality. The mid-hive seems as distant and impossible as the spires above it, or the palace of the planetary governor, or Holy Terror itself. These are places that exist in stories, not in the world you inhabit. Your world is the Drench, the damp darkness, the hunger, the struggle. Your reference points recalibrate. The warm pipe becomes precious beyond gold. A successful rat trap becomes a cause for celebration. A day without injury or illness becomes a victory. The concept of better erodes, replaced by the binary of surviving and not surviving. I suspect this is what the Imperium depends on, this erosion. If those of us in the Underhive truly believed we could reach the levels above, truly understood that we are separated from better conditions only by vertical distance and the will to climb, the entire structure would destabilize. The hive functions because each level accepts its position, and the Underhive accepts its position at the bottom, both literally and metaphorically. We are the foundation, we bear the weight, we endure, and in enduring, we permit those above us to never think of us at all. The thrumming has been growing louder. This is the observation that has consumed me for the past month, the fact that has displaced nearly every other concern. The pattern continues 42 hours of warmth, increasingly interrupted by brief cold surges, followed by longer cold periods now stretching to 23 hours. But the thrumming during the cold periods has intensified to the point where it is no longer merely felt but clearly heard. It sounds like a heartbeat, if a heart were mechanical and enormous and buried somewhere deep beneath the Drench. Boom boom, boom boom, boom boom. The rhythm is not quite regular. It stutters sometimes, skips beats, then resumes. I have noticed that other inhabitants of the Drench are reacting to the thrumming as well, though their reactions vary. Some seem not to notice it at all, going about their business as if nothing has changed. Others have become agitated, arguing in the darkness, their voices rising in panic. The penitents have increased their activities, their prayer groups gathering in the larger chambers to chant litanies asking for the Emperor's protection. The wireheads have been seen more frequently in territories they usually avoid, as if searching for something. And there have been disappearances. People who inhabit the drench are not meticulously tracked. There is no census, no record-keeping, but you notice patterns in the population of a confined space. You recognize faces, even if you do not know names. 3 weeks ago, I realized I had not seen a woman who usually scavenges near the collapsed transit hub. I assumed she had died or moved to a different section. Then I noticed that a pair of salvagers who always worked together were absent. Then an entire group affiliated with the scrapers vanished, their habitation found empty, their possessions undisturbed. At first, I attributed this to normal Underhive attrition. Death is common, and bodies are often consumed by vermin or dissolved in the toxic pools before anyone finds them. But the pattern of disappearances troubles me. They seem to correlate with the thrumming. People vanish during the cold periods, specifically during the hours when the thrumming is loudest. I have no proof of this correlation beyond my own observations and my increasingly paranoid pattern recognition, but I have begun taking precautions. During the cold periods, when the thrumming fills the air, I barricade the entrance to my habitation and refuse to emerge regardless of circumstance. I have forbidden Skiv to leave during these times as well, though he does not understand why, and I cannot adequately explain my reasoning. 2 weeks ago, I broke my rule about not investigating screams. The thrumming was at its peak, a vibration so intense it made the moisture on the walls ripple, and I heard a sound that cut through the mechanical heartbeat, a scream of absolute terror, close enough that it came from within my immediate territory. I should have ignored it. Every survival instinct I have developed screamed at me to remain barricaded, but the scream held a specific quality of desperation that compelled action. I unbarricaded my entrance, took my pipe wrench, and followed the sound to its source, a chamber 3 passages away, one of the larger voids created by intersecting support structures. The chamber was dark, except for a faint bioluminescence from fungal growth on the walls. In the center of the chamber stood a man I recognized, one of the solos like myself, someone I had traded with occasionally. He was standing perfectly still, his arms at his sides, his head tilted back, staring upward. I called out to him, but he did not respond. I approached cautiously, wrench ready, and as I drew closer, I saw that he was not simply standing still. He was rigid, every muscle locked, trembling with the effort of maintaining his position. His eyes were open but unseeing, pupils dilated to the point where the iris was barely visible. His mouth hung open, and a thin stream of drool ran down his chin. I reached out to touch his shoulder, and the moment my fingers made contact, he jerked as if electrocuted and collapsed. I caught him, lowering him to the ground, and he seized violently, his body convulsing. The seizure lasted perhaps 30 seconds, and then he went limp. I checked for breathing, for pulse, both present, but his skin was cold, far colder than the ambient temperature could account for. I dragged him back to my habitation, struggling under his dead weight, and once there, I wrapped him in every thermal covering I possessed and waited. He remained unconscious for 6 hours. When he finally woke, he was incoherent, babbling about the deep call and the cold singing and the machine that dreams. I tried to extract coherent information from him, but he would not or could not provide clarity. He remained in my habitation for 2 days, recovering slowly, and then he insisted on leaving despite my warnings. I gave him water and some fungus paste, and he left, walking unsteadily but determinedly. I have not seen him since. I suspect he has joined the disappeared, drawn back to whatever experience he underwent in that chamber. I went to Verdant with this information immediately. I needed to know if he had observed similar events, if my experience was isolated or part of a pattern. I found the garden through the flooded tunnel, the water now deeper than usual. reaching my chest at the deepest point. And when I emerged into the hydroponic chamber, I found Verdant in a state I had never seen before. He was frantic, moving between his plants with jerky, agitated motions, checking readouts on jury-rigged equipment, making notes on multiple data slates simultaneously. When he saw me, he thrust a note into my hands before I could even speak. It is waking. All observations confirm. Temperature fluctuations, electromagnetic anomalies, population displacement, estimated 30 days until full activation. Must document everything. You must continue measurements. I read this note 3 times, trying to parse its meaning. What is waking? I wrote back. What is activating? Verdant's response was infuriatingly cryptic. The infrastructure, the machine spirit, the god beneath. Names are insufficient. It has been dormant for millennia. Your pipe was always part of it. All the systems were. We built our city on its body. Now it stirs. This explanation answered nothing while simultaneously making everything worse. I have spent 37 years in this hive, 17 of them in the drench, and I have always understood the infrastructure as dead matter, inanimate metal, and stone shaped by human labor. The idea that the hive itself, or something beneath it, could be a living system or a dormant machine achieving consciousness is antithetical to every framework I possess for understanding reality. And yet, the evidence accumulates. The pipe warmth cycling with mechanical precision, the thrumming that suggests a heartbeat, the patterns in the sounds that resemble language, the disappearances concentrated during specific phases, the man frozen in place, experiencing something that left him speaking of deep calls and singing cold and dreaming machines. I am not educated enough to know if such a thing is possible within the Imperium's technology. I know of servitors, humans merged with machinery. I know of machine spirits, the semi-conscious essences that inhabit complex devices. I know, from propaganda, of the machine god worshipped by the tech priests of Mars. Could something analogous exist beneath a hive? Could we have been living upon and within a sleeping mechanism of incomprehensible scale? The implications terrify me more than any immediate physical threat I have faced. If Verdant is correct, if something is waking, what happens when it fully activates? Does the hive survive such an event? Do we? I think of the man seized and frozen, his consciousness apparently hijacked by some external force. I think of the disappearances. Are these people being consumed, absorbed, integrated into whatever system is awakening? I have no framework for fighting such a threat. Violence is useless against a phenomenon of this scale. Information, my other currency, is insufficient because I do not understand what I am observing. Desperation rises in me like the toxic water in the flooded tunnels, and I recognize that I am approaching the threshold where desperate action becomes inevitable, even if I know it will be futile. The Tithe Keeper's most recent distribution occurred 5 days ago, and I attended despite the risk, hoping to gather information about whether the authorities in the mid-hive or above are aware of what is happening in the drench. The distribution site was more heavily guarded than usual, the Tithe Keeper's mercenaries armed with combat shotguns and wearing full environment suits, as if they expected a riot or contamination event. The Tithe Keeper himself, a corpulent man whose face I have never seen clearly behind his rebreather mask, seemed agitated, his movements sharp and irritable. The distribution was perfunctory, rations thrown to the waiting crowd with barely a glance at work chits or credentials. I managed to catch a small packet of corpse starch, more through luck than skill. As the crowd dispersed, I lingered, and I overheard a conversation between 2 of the mercenaries. Seismic readings off the charts. One was saying, "The tech adepts say it's tectonic activity, but that doesn't explain the electromagnetic spikes." The other responded, "Does it matter? We're pulling out in 2 weeks. Let the Underhive collapse." Not like anyone up top will notice. This conversation confirmed my worst fears. The authorities know something is occurring. They have data I do not possess. Sophisticated measurements beyond my primitive tallying of warm and cold periods. And their response is evacuation, not intervention. They will abandon the drench, and everyone in it, without warning or assistance. This is consistent with imperial policy. The individual is meaningless. Sacrifice is expected. The hive must endure even if populations within it are expendable. I understand this intellectually. I have always understood it. But understanding and experiencing are different. And hearing my death sentence delivered casually by men who view me as less important than the ammunition they carry produces a rage I have rarely felt. I wanted to attack them, to make them acknowledge me, to force them to see me as a person rather than acceptable collateral. I did not, because I would have been shot immediately and achieved nothing. Instead, I returned to my habitation and told Skiv to begin gathering everything portable and valuable. We are leaving the drench. We will attempt the Rust King's route, or one of the collapsed tunnels, or the vertical shaft with the wire heads. Any risk is preferable to remaining here to be buried or consumed, or integrated into whatever is waking beneath us. But I am documenting this first. If we die in the attempt and the probability is high, someone should know what occurred here. Someone should have a record of the warm pipe cycles, the thrumming's escalation, the disappearances, Verdant's warnings. I do not know if this data slate will survive or be recovered, but I am writing as if it will, because the alternative is accepting that everything I have observed is meaningless, and I cannot accept that. Meaning is the last thing I possess beyond survival itself. The thrumming has changed again. 3 days ago, it shifted from the mechanical heartbeat pattern to something more complex. Now it carries within it distinct tones, almost musical, rising and falling in scales that hurt to listen to because they include frequencies my ears struggle to process. The lower tones I feel in my bones, the higher tones make my teeth ache. And woven through the scales are sounds that resemble words. Not words in Low Gothic or any language I recognize, but phonemes, repeated syllables, patterns that suggest communication. I have tried to transcribe what I hear. An ket an, vesh ma vesh, oral ket oral. These are approximations, my ears struggling with sounds that might not be meant for human hearing. But I swear they are words. I swear they mean something. Skiv has begun sleepwalking. I wake in the cold periods to find him standing at the entrance of our habitation, his small body silhouetted against the faint bioluminescence of the passage beyond, perfectly still. The first time this occurred, I thought he was awake, keeping watch, and I called his name. He did not respond. I approached and touched his shoulder, and he startled violently, gasping, his eyes opening wide. He had no memory of leaving his sleeping spot, no awareness of standing at the entrance. It has happened 3 more times since, and each time he is positioned a little closer to leaving entirely. Last night, I found him actually in the passage beyond, several meters from our habitation, walking slowly toward the deeper warrens. I grabbed him and carried him back, and he woke struggling in my arms, terrified and disoriented. When he calmed, he told me he had been dreaming of a voice calling his name, a voice that came from below, from the direction of the sump, and the voice promised warmth and safety and belonging. I told him it was only a dream, but I know it was not. Whatever is waking is calling to us, specifically to those like Skiv whose minds are young and malleable, or perhaps those like the man I found frozen whose consciousness can be more easily accessed. I have barricaded Skiv into his sleeping area using scrap metal and wire, constructing a cage that will contain him if he attempts to sleepwalk again. He protested this arrangement, but I was firm. I cannot watch him every moment, and I cannot allow him to vanish into the darkness following a false promise of warmth. The irony is not lost on me. I have survived in part because of my warm pipe, that small mercy of heat in the cold, and now I understand that even that small mercy was a lure, a hook, drawing me and others to specific locations, keeping us positioned where we could be most easily affected by whatever processes are unfolding. Yesterday, I made my final visit to Verdant, bringing him all my documentation, every mark I have made, every observation I have recorded. The garden was in disarray, plants torn from their hydroponic beds, equipment smashed, water flooding the floor. At first I thought the garden had been raided, but then I found Verdant himself in the deepest corner of the chamber, crouched behind an overturned growing tray, his entire body shaking. When he saw me, he did not offer a note. Instead, he spoke, his voice hoarse and cracking. The first time I had ever heard him utter a sound. "It showed me," he said, "last night during the deep thrumming. It showed me what it is, what we are." I asked him what he saw, though I was not certain I wanted to know. He continued as if I had not spoken. "The hive is a seed. The thing beneath is the planter. 10,000 years ago, it chose this location, extended tendrils upward, created the foundations we built upon. It shaped the geography, the mineral deposits, the water sources. Everything that made this an ideal location for a hive city was engineered to attract us. We were supposed to build here, supposed to grow here, expand, multiply, layer upon layer upon layer. Do you understand? We are cultivation. The hive is a crop. And now it is harvest time." I asked Verdant how he knew this, how the thing beneath had communicated such specific information. He laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. "It did not communicate. It simply opened itself to observation. I saw it, all of it. The structure extending down past the sump, past the bedrock, into the planetary mantle. Roots, or perhaps veins, spreading through the crust, connecting to other sites beneath other hives, a network spanning the world. And deep, so deep I cannot estimate the depth, a central mass, alive, aware, patient. It has been waiting for us to reach critical density, enough biomass accumulated in the hive to make the harvest worthwhile. And we have. Billions in the upper levels, millions in the underhive, all contained, all positioned. The drench was never forgotten, you understand. It was exactly where we were supposed to be. The most accessible layer, first, to be processed." He stopped, breathing heavily. "I destroyed my equipment. I will not document further. I do not wish to know more. You should leave. Take the boy, and leave. Climb, fight, do whatever you must, but leave." I left Verdant there in the ruins of his garden and returned to my habitation, my mind struggling to process what he had told me. If his vision was accurate, and I have no reason to believe it was not, given how thoroughly it explains everything I have observed, then we are not living in a city built by human hands on dead earth. We are living in a mechanism designed to cultivate us, and that mechanism is now preparing to fulfill its purpose. The warm pipes were not heating systems but sensory organs, monitoring the population, testing readiness. The thrumming is not machinery malfunctioning but a vast organism awakening from millennia of dormancy. The disappearances are not simply people dying but people being claimed, possibly already processed into whatever form the harvest takes. And if the network Verdant described is real, this is not an isolated event. This may be occurring beneath every hive on the planet simultaneously, a synchronized harvesting of humanity on a scale I cannot comprehend. We attempted to leave yesterday. Skiv and I, carrying everything we could transport, made for the nearest accessible route upward. We chose a maintenance shaft that supposedly connects to level -94, the level I descended from 17 years ago. The shaft entrance was partially blocked by rubble, but we cleared enough to squeeze through and began climbing. The shaft was vertical, equipped with a rusted ladder, and we climbed in darkness, broken only by my small hand light. We climbed for what felt like hours, my muscles burning, Skiv above me, his breathing ragged. We passed through several levels of abandoned infrastructure, chambers that had once served purposes I could not identify, now empty and corroded. And then we reached an obstruction. The shaft continued upward, but blocking it completely was a membrane. I call it a membrane because I lack a better term. It was organic, or appeared organic. A semi-translucent material stretched across the shaft's width, pulsing slightly as if breathing. It was warm to the touch, and when I pressed my hand against it, I felt a responding pressure, as if something on the other side was pressing back. The membrane was not old, not part of the original structure. It was new. It had been grown or placed here, blocking the exit. I tried cutting it with my wrench, striking it with all my strength, but the tool simply bounced off, and the membrane absorbed the impact without tearing. We tried for 30 minutes to breach it, to find a weakness, and we failed entirely. Defeated, we descended back to the drench. I checked 2 other routes over the course of the day, including the flooded tunnel that leads to what I thought was another shaft. All blocked, all sealed with variations of the membrane. The thing beneath has closed all exits. We are contained. Harvesting preparations are complete. The thrumming is now constant. It no longer cycles with the pipe's warmth, which has stabilized at a perpetual lukewarm temperature, as if the monitoring phase is over and maintenance heat is no longer necessary. The sound fills the air every moment, a deep vibration accompanied by those rising and falling tones, those word-like syllables. An ket an, vesh ma vesh, oral ket oral. I hear them in my sleep. I hear them when I wake. Skiv hears them too. He whispers them sometimes, unconsciously mimicking the sounds. I have stopped trying to make him stop because I catch myself doing the same thing. The population of the drench is changing. Not declining, the disappearances have stopped, but changing. People are moving toward the deeper warrens, toward the sump, in organized groups. They walk in lines, silent, their faces blank, heading downward. I watched a column of 20 people pass through my territory yesterday, and I recognized several of them. A woman who used to scavenge near me, 2 scrapers, a penitent I had seen preaching. They did not respond when I called to them. They simply walked, their movements synchronized, all heading in the same direction. Downward, always downward. I understand now that the harvest is not violent. It does not require force. It simply calls, and those who hear the call walk willingly into processing. The man I found frozen was resisting this call, his body locked in place, as his mind fought against the compulsion. Most do not resist. Most simply obey. Skiv asked me this morning why we do not follow the others. They look peaceful, he said. They look like they know where they are going. I told him that peace achieved through surrendering autonomy is not peace but surrender, and that we are not surrendering. He accepted this, though I could see doubt in his eyes. The call is strong. I feel it myself. A persistent pull, a sense that walking downward would be easier than resisting, that whatever awaits below might indeed offer the warmth and safety it promises. I resist by focusing on small tasks, maintaining the habitation, checking the barricades, documenting on this data slate. If I keep my mind occupied, the call weakens. But I know this is temporary. The call is growing stronger daily. Eventually, it will overwhelm my resistance, or I will sleep, and while sleeping, I will rise and walk like Skiv attempted to do. And I will not wake until I am already in the depths, already processing. 3 days ago, the membranes blocking the upward routes became transparent. I discovered this by chance, checking one of the sealed shafts, and I could suddenly see through the membrane to the space beyond. What I saw was not level -94. It was not any architectural space I recognized. Beyond the membrane was an organic cavity, a chamber whose walls were not metal or stone but something that looked like flesh, pale and veined, pulsing with internal movement. The cavity was lit by bioluminescence, a sickly green glow, and within it I could see shapes moving. Figures, human-shaped, but not quite human anymore. They were being restructured, their bodies opened and reconfigured, limbs repositioned, organs exposed and rearranged. Some were fused together, multiple individuals merged into composite forms. Some were being reduced, their bodies disassembled and compacted. All of this was occurring without apparent pain. The figures moved sluggishly, as if sedated, offering no resistance. I watched for 5 minutes before I could not bear to watch longer. That is what awaits in the harvest. That is what the thing beneath does with us. We are not food. Exactly. We are material, raw components to be broken down and reformed into whatever structures or servants or biomechanisms the thing beneath requires. I told Skiv about what I saw, because I decided he deserved to know the truth. He listened quietly, his face pale, and then he asked me if we can die instead. Would dying be better than going down? He asked. I did not know how to answer. By any moral framework I was raised with, suicide is a sin against the Emperor, a rejection of his will, an ultimate cowardice. But what is awaiting us below seems worse than death, a fate that strips away everything that makes a person an individual and reconfigures them into purposeless biomatter. After a long silence, I told Skiv that we would not make that choice yet, that while we still had strength and awareness, we would resist, and only if resistance became truly impossible would we consider other options. He nodded, accepting this, and we sat together in our habitation, listening to the thrumming, the syllables that are no longer incomprehensible, but beginning to carry meaning. I understand the words now. This is the most recent development, the one that tells me I have very little time remaining before I can no longer resist. Anket An means something like become. Vesh Marvesh means something like merge or unify. Oral Ket Oral means something like purpose or function. The thing beneath is not speaking to us in language we were taught. It is teaching us its language directly, altering our neural patterns so that its communications become comprehensible. And with comprehension comes compulsion. Now when I hear An Ket An, I feel a pull to transform, to allow myself to be changed. When I hear Vesh Ma Vesh, I feel a desire to join with others, to merge. When I hear Oral Ket Oral, I feel that my resistance is meaningless, that accepting purpose is inevitable. These are not my thoughts. They are thoughts being inserted into my consciousness by the vibrations in the air, the thrumming that penetrates my skull and stimulates my brain directly. I am writing this final entry because I do not know how much longer I can maintain coherent thought. Skiv is asleep in his cage, but his sleep is not natural. He is whispering the syllables, and his body is twitching rhythmically. When he wakes, I do not know if he will still be Skiv, or if he will be something else, something already partially processed. I have decided that if he wakes changed, if he attempts to walk downward, I will not stop him. I will not force him to remain aware and suffering, but I will not follow. Not yet. The warm pipe has changed one final time. It is no longer warm or cold. It is pulsing, rhythmically, like a heartbeat, and the pulsing matches the thrumming exactly. I press my hand against it, and I feel the vibration entering my body, traveling up my arm, spreading through my chest, reaching my heart, and my heart begins to synchronize with the pulse. I pull my hand away, gasping, terrified, because I understand that this is how it happens. This is how the call becomes irresistible. Your own body betrays you, your rhythm altered to match the thing beneath, until you are no longer a separate entity but a synchronized component of a vast system. I am so tired. 17 years in the drench have exhausted me in ways I cannot articulate. The struggle to survive, the daily violence, the hunger, the cold, the fear, the loneliness broken only by Skiv's presence. It has hollowed me out. and the thing beneath is offering rest, offering purpose, offering belonging. These are lies, I know this. The rest is obliteration of self. The purpose is servitude. The belonging is forced integration. But the lies are seductive when you are this tired. And I feel my resistance weakening, not because the call is growing stronger, but because I am growing weaker. I will hide this data slate in the deepest corner of my habitation, wrapped in waterproof material, in a place where it might survive. I do not know if anyone will ever read it. The Tithe Keeper's mercenaries said they were evacuating in 2 weeks, and that was 10 days ago. So perhaps they are already gone. Perhaps the entire mid-hive is gone, fled upward to the spires, leaving the underhive to its fate. Or perhaps the harvest extends upward as well, level by level, everyone processed. I do not know. I know only what I have observed here in the drench, and I have recorded it as thoroughly as I can. The thrumming is so loud now that I can barely hear my own thoughts. The syllables echo in my skull. An ket an, vesh ma vesh, orul ket orul. Become, merge, purpose. My hand moves toward the pipe without conscious decision, drawn by the pulse. Skiv is stirring in his cage, waking, and when he opens his eyes, they are not quite his eyes anymore. The color is wrong, the pupils too dilated, and he smiles at me. And the smile is wrong, and he speaks, but the voice is wrong, layered with harmonics, and he says, "It is time to go down. We are called, we are wanted, we will be warm forever," and I realize that I am standing. I do not remember deciding to stand. My feet are moving toward the entrance. Skiv is dismantling his cage from the inside with strength he should not possess, tearing the wire apart with bleeding hands that do not seem to notice pain. We are walking, together, toward the passage that leads to the deeper warrens, toward the sump, toward the depth where the thing beneath waits with patience measured in millennia. I try to stop walking. My body does not obey. I scream, but no sound emerges. Or perhaps sound emerges, but it is not my scream, it is the syllables, my voice joining the thrumming, adding my small vibration to the vast chorus. We are descending. The passage darkens, the bioluminescence fades. But I am not afraid of the darkness anymore because I understand that I am going toward warmth, toward belonging, toward purpose. These are lies. I know these are lies. But knowing does not help. Somewhere far above, the Imperium continues, the manufactorums grind, the spires glitter, the planetary governor issues edicts, the tithes are collected, the ships arrive and depart. The Imperium is vast and eternal and glorious. The Imperium does not know we are here. The Imperium does not care we are here. The Imperium will not mourn us when we are gone, because we were never counted, never valued, never real to those above. We were cultivation, we were harvest, we were always meant for this. The warmth is close now. I can feel it ahead, a heat that promises ending. Skiv's hand finds mine in the darkness, small fingers squeezing tight, and I squeeze back. One last gesture of humanity, before humanity is no longer relevant. An ket an, vesh ma vesh, orul ket orul. I become, I merge, I accept purpose. The thrumming is everything. The thrumming is eternal. The thrumming is